So hello, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to welcome you in the name of the project, Post2020 Global Biodiversity Framework EU support. We've been working for 3 years already, fighting to raise ambition for the draft one, and then hopefully a Global Diversity Framework that will come very soon later this year. So we're now in the second phase of our project. We'll continue working for biodiversity for the next 3 years with a little another focus. So in the first phase, it was all about the negotiation process. This time around, we want to also focus on implementation. So we will keep following and supporting as much as possible the dialogue and process up to the COP, but we want also to play a role in expanding this dialogue to pathways on how can we kickstart a very quick implementation of a new framework. So and that's exactly the aim of this session. We want to reflect with all of you and our panelists pathways for transformative actions towards a quick uptake of a common framework. Let me introduce my panel today. So Elizabeth Brema will perhaps be coming. We don't know if she can make it, but we hope so. The Executive Secretary of the CBD. I welcome also Marco Lambertini from WWF International, Ingrid Coetzi from ICLEI, Ameyali Ramos from the ICA Consortium. Welcome. Good to have you here. Melina Sakiyama, always a pleasure, from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Eva from Business for Nature, thank you for being here. Always important to have you. And Pauline, a colleague of mine from Expertise France, from a project that is dealing with exactly these topics about mainstreaming of biodiversity in several countries. So we don't want to lose time because we want to discuss with you as much as possible. So the format will be as follows. I will ask short questions to the panel. Then they will have 5 minutes to give us some ideas on this transformative pathways for implementation. And after that, I will open the floor for our participants here in the room, also for our participants on Zoom. A colleague of mine will be collecting questions from the Zoom. And I hope that we have lively discussions afterwards. So my first question is for you, Marco. And this is the same question that I will be putting to you, Ameyali, and also to you, Melina. And that would be, as a civil society organization, what is your secret recipe? You know, your recipe for success in driving transformative change inside the CBD arena, but more importantly, so beyond the CBD arena. And what is your vision or your suggestions for transformative actions for the implementation of the future Global Biodiversity Framework? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I noticed you kept the mask on, so I suppose this is the policy, right? Yeah. I'll stick to the mask, although it's quite tricky, but I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all, and for the question. It is a question to give me the space to maybe start with one reflection. The reflection is that I guess everybody in this room and online agree on the fact that the evidence of our impact on nature has never been greater, and is in fact overwhelming today, and particularly the understanding and the evidence of the impacts that this is having on our own society, on our own economy, on our own lives, our health. And as you often say, nature conservation in the last perhaps decade, less than a decade, has shifted in perception by the general public and society at large, from something that was more about us having the moral duty to exist and coexist with nature, to actually an existential need for our species to survive, to develop equitably, and to thrive in future. So a very different perspective on nature conservation. Therefore, nature loss today is perceived as a major threat alongside, of course, climate change. I say that because in order to deal with a pressing and urgent threat like nature loss, we need a global commitment and we need a global plan. Many actions have been taken at the government level, corporate level, society level, municipalities level, institutional level, but we know that they're not enough. And they're not enough particularly because we don't have a reference point. We don't have a common direction, a common goal that inspires us and drives the right level of action, the right scale of action, in the right pace of action in moving forward. So I'm going to highlight this point. You ask, in the question, what are the key ingredients? So when you cook a good dish, of course, you need many ingredients. One ingredient won't do it. There are many ingredients coming together inevitably, and this is the GBF complexity of our targets and goal, et cetera, et cetera. All that's very important. So I'm not going to dismiss that for a second. But when you cook a good dish, also you start from one ingredient, and then you continue and you add in a sequence. And I think what we are perhaps still missing here in the discussion on the GBF in these last 10 days is to focus on the first ingredient of the dish, which is the mission, which is the common direction that we want to embrace as a society. The mission right now is not good enough. Let me just be absolutely clear. The mission, it is nicely worded, but not ambitious and not measurable. And when you have a mission that is very aspirational, but not measurable, that's frankly is the recipe not for a good dish, but for a bad dish. And we've seen that actually in other conventions as well, including the previous iteration of the Aichi set of targets and the CBD convention. So our plea, our push, our request is to actually define a strong mission, a mission that is measurable, is clear in direction, and is unifying as much as we have the same level of unity on a mission for climate change. On climate change is absolutely crystal clear. We have embraced, through the Paris Agreement and beyond, a carbon neutral goal, zero net emissions by 2050. That's the goal around climate. Everybody is rallying around it, and actually that goal has disrupted the energy sector to a point that divestment from fossil fuel is happening, investment in renewable energy is happening, electrification in a number of sectors is happening, et cetera, et cetera. We need the same global goal for nature, equally clear, equally disruptive, so that the other economic sectors that are driving nature loss, agriculture, fishing, forestry, infrastructure, extractives, are also going to be disrupted towards a nature positive global goal. Nature positive is simply, we support a goal that is simply saying, we need more nature. We need more nature than today. We need to conserve what we have. We need to halt and reverse the loss of nature, and we need to invest in restoration. And therefore, a nature positive goal, a reverse by 2030, reverse nature loss by 2030 global goal, will drive the economic sectors that we need to see shift in a direction of those nature positive practices. So we will have nature positive agriculture, more pollinators in the countryside, more biodiversity in the soil. We will have nature positive forestry, more trees, no less than we have today. We will have nature positive infrastructure that leave more nature after the construction than before. And we will have nature positive cities, where there will be more nature in cities than there is today. So this will become the unifying global goal that every sector, every government, every individual could actually embrace, exactly like we're doing with carbon neutrality. And so this is my top ingredient of the recipe: a strong mission, measurable and inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that's a very good recipe, because my impression is,
we'll see how it is later on.
As a project is always, you have a vision, but there's always a connotation behind a certain name or certain elements, and it's something that we need to do to discuss. What does it mean? To be ambitious, to be nature positive. So with that, I will give the floor to Ameyali, and please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's wonderful. I think we all agree that we need a clear recipe for success and a global vision. But I think here from the ICA consortium, what we'd like to bring to the table is that conservation in a lot of places is happening very locally. Transformative action is happening now. The majority of the world's biodiversity is on indigenous peoples' lands and territories. And they really are the unsung heroes of conservation. More and more people are realizing that without their work, their custodianship, their relationships with nature, their collective governance, we wouldn't have any biodiversity to have a global mission on. So I think the transformative change is happening already. It's there, it's on the ground. And one opportunity we have here at the GBF and also as individuals and as organizations is to figure out what exactly we can do to, one, contribute to their goal and mission, and two, step out of the way. So for me, there's two things I'd really like to focus on today. One of them is how we need to achieve this transformative change by directly supporting indigenous peoples and communities. And I think we can do that in two very, very concrete ways. One of them is we need to increase technical, political, financial support for indigenous peoples to nurture their own relationships with nature on their own terms, with their self-determination and collective governance systems. The second is we need to support communities to continue to document, consolidate evidence, communicate, and advocate for themselves, and strengthen their unity through solidarity networks and alliances with other movements. They are having an increasingly loud voice. We need to listen, we need to learn, we need to be humble, and we need to give them the opportunity to do what they've been doing and continue to do without much support, really, if we're honest. The second, I think, is I'd like to call for a transformative change and a systemic change in the conservation sector. We have to realize that that's where a significant amount of power continues to be held, power and money. And we need to really rethink how we do conservation, what we understand as conservation, and who is doing that conservation. I think oftentimes those who are doing the conservation on the ground aren't the ones sitting at the table. They aren't the ones receiving the funds. They aren't even the ones contributing to this global mission. We have to make sure that we're listening. We have to make sure that we're learning, and we have to make sure that we're appropriately supporting. So how can we do that specifically at the GBF? I think there's very pointed ways for how. One is we need to require human rights safeguards and accountability mechanisms in funding for conservation initiatives. We've seen there's a long history and a legacy of past and current human rights abuses related to conservation. There's a growing number of environmental defenders who are sacrificing their lives every day in the name of nature, in the name of this global vision, in this name of nature. I agree with nature positive, but I don't think anybody needs to lose their life for it. So I think we need to be really critical about how we're doing conservation as conservationists, as people in the room. We have to recognize that mainstream conservation is driven by money and power. And as narratives, attitudes, and values continue to shift in favor of communities and human rights, so too will the money. And mainstream conservation actors will have no choice but to shift as well. The second one is, I think we need to start treating the mainstream conservation industry as an industry and apply the same level of scrutiny, transparency, and accountability throughout the conservation supply chain that we do for any multinational corporation that is causing harm to communities. Big multinational NGOs still dominate the mainstream conservation and act like monopolies, but they should not be the middlemen, and they should not be the conduits for supports to indigenous people. We need far more diversification and localization of conservation institutions, and this should be the priority of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and the priority of all of us who are here in this room, who have the opportunity to make sure that we're doing absolutely everything we can for those who are on the ground doing conservations on the front lines every day through their ways of life and their collective stewardship to continue to do so.
Thank you, Mayali. And I remember a conversation we had, you were not present, but there was a conversation at Marseille at the UCN World Congress, where we were talking with Christian from Jibin also on how to achieve a system in which the money that funds the resources come to the ground where action is happening. So that was very helpful for thoughts today. And I'm curious about the reaction from the participants. We'll continue the discussion. And now I'll give you over to you, Melina, for your thoughts on the question.
Okay, thank you so much for everyone for coming here and for participating in this dialogue. I'm just gonna take one of the maps because it's a bit hard to speak with two of them. Just a disclaimer, I'm gonna use my place of speak as a representative from the youth constituency to be disruptive and to be a little bit annoying maybe, and to say a couple of things that a lot of young people are thinking about the world, but perhaps don't have the confidence, nor the power, nor the access to those spaces, nor the resources to be able to talk to you here. I have 5 ingredients for perhaps what could be a truly system-wide transformative change. I don't think it's anything out of the box, the words per se, but the way they are framed might be exactly the out of the box thinking that we need at the moment, because as we are all here following the negotiations, there is a lot of the sameness going on there. And I think we need to talk about that. Like, I will start with the fact that all of this that I'm saying come from extensive youth consultative process that has happened on the ground with over 113 countries in the ground, and it's in a bottom-up youth-led process. So there was no middleman sort of like trying to sort of like, oh, let me synthesize what young people wants to say. No, this is all coming from like the people in the ground. Oops, sorry, I'm just having here my notes. So I think the first one is recognize complexity. And I'm glad that we have like scientists here and people representing like IPES, because I think like if we really go through the global assessment report, it's pretty clear. We are not in a simple problem, in a linear problem. It's like layers and layers and layers of crisis. And like, we cannot be naive to think that there are a simple solution or a quick fix, or like we push a button, like in a machine, you know, that is still to be invented, and then we're gonna fix the situation. No, like the solutions don't really exist. What we are trying to find is pathways towards this transformation. It's pathways when we can like understand the layers of the crisis, and then we can act together and try to see what can be leveraged so that we can, through smaller changes, like cascading to bigger changes. And this is gonna take time. And I'm the young person in the room saying that it's gonna take time. So young people are aware of that. We are impatient, we are anxious, we are concerned about our future, but we understand the depth of the mess that we are. Also, the second point is we need to see the invisible. You know, the ugly, the uncomfortable, the people that are not in the room, the people that we always forget about it. There's no way we're gonna be able to change anything if we don't confront our historical past of exploitation, of oppression, right? That generated the power imbalances and the privileges that we see each other, like since like those times, colonization, like and imperialism more recently, we know that certain people received privileges and certain people have been left behind consistently, systematically, right? Can we solve, like, can we get into a pathway for transformative change without recognizing them, without seeing the invisible? No. IPES also said that there's no way we are going to achieve transformative change if we don't look at the inequalities of this world. So like we are here, of course, we are in the convention of biological diversity. We are mostly natural scientists, but this cannot be the excuse anymore. You know, we live in a globalized world. We live in a multicultural world. We as natural scientists or social scientists or politicians or whatever, we need to understand also the human dimension and this historical dimension. Like, don't forget that like since the past, those privileges has been given in economic, social, cultural, like all sectors of society. So it means that all sectors of society might still be operating under those bases, right? My third ingredient is like, I know it sounds like soft and cute, you know, like, and giving has been called many times cute and technical, but we need to go back to principles. It's not because it's like a nice idea that it doesn't have power, that it doesn't matter, you know? Like we are in a world that is constantly being driven by profit, right? Is profit what everybody in this world wants? Is profit gonna generate all the good life that we want? Is gonna generate all the health? Is gonna generate all the happiness that we want? Who is deciding that, right? So while we still have like just one group of values being prioritized over everything else, I think the only solution, the only reality we're gonna see is one, right? Monoculture of ideas, monoculture of the way we live in this world. So if we don't recognize this diversity, if we don't change perhaps the principles that are underpinning all our activities and all our actions and all our thinking in this world, what kind of reality, what kind of future we are gonna build? Okay, so like for Gibbon in this aspect, and this is interesting, ask your kids, ask your younger relatives, what are the principles and values they would like to live by? And many of them are gonna probably say inclusion, respect, like empathy. Like kids nowadays are so much more sensitive. They are allowed to be sensitive. We understand that in the past it was difficult to be sensitive. Men could not cry, women had to be strong and all of these kind of things. This is a new world. We can be sensitive, we can care about each other, and this might change the future that we are gonna live in. Now, the fourth is about collective, and it's about like the me against the we. Okay, and it's not collective, meaning that we all need to be uniform and we all need to be standardized and we all need to be monocultures. No, it's about collective meaning that we can understand, that we can embrace and appreciate each other's diversity. We need diversity of ideas, diversity of visions, so that we can overcome the layers of crisis that we are in, and we can start moving towards a pathway of transformation, right? We need to move away from individual protagonism, my organization, my vision, my values, right? What is our vision? What is our collective work? What can we do together? I think this should be the spirit. Otherwise, how we are going to combine, or like how we are going to have consensus among 192 parties, right? We need to start thinking more collective, because this time the collective is not going to be bad for everybody, right? We are talking about the global commons, right? So how can you not be collective on this? And then the last one, the last but not the least, is about reconciliation. Okay, we need to finally admit our mistakes, recognize it. It's not to blame anybody, right? But it's to find a pathway for like reconciliation, so that we can achieve this togetherness, achieve this collective thinking, and move forward. It means also that we need to go through a deep self-reflection, our organizations, us as individually. What are we doing? What are the principles that are underpinning my life and my work? I am a researcher. Am I doing a research that is gender responsive, that is like inclusive towards the community, that has benefits together with the community, that has been discussed with the community? I am a business. Is my enterprise really like looking into the impact, or is just greenwashing, right? Like nowadays we are trying to propose many new words, and I have this conversation, not me personally, but my organization with Marco, about positive and about nature-based solutions and about different new names that are coming in. Do we really need those different new names, right? Do they confuse people, or do they make it like easier, the message to be passed through, right? Who are the interests, like whose interests we are like supporting with just new names and new concepts? I think in the end, it's about the principles. It's about like you as a business, your business is contributing, but it's also having an impact. Everything we do in this world now has an impact. There's no shame on that. But we need to really look at it, be honest, be true, and fix it. It's the same, like as Amelia said, for the conservation organizations, for all of us, even us as young people, we need to look at our impacts and what we can do or not. So I think this is the path for reconciliation, and this is the path for transformative change. I'm sorry if I was too long. Thank you.
Not at all, Melina, thank you. And I like very much, the inclusiveness of your thoughts, and I don't think that they are disruptive at all. I think they're in line with the spirit of, how we would like to see the conversation going, and how we would like to have a turn in cultural paradigms and finding, new visions and new meaning, behind the words. And I know that Business for Nature has a major contribution to that conversation. So I'm very happy to have Eva here. So I will, yes.
It's a good strategy to turn the mic off. No, I'm joking.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And to be honest, I feel very inspired, and it is disruptive, even though what it is it's less new words. I think there is so much to be said. And I had a few points that I was going to go through, but to begin with, I feel like reacting a bit to what I've heard already from the business perspective. So these masks are tough, man. Yeah. Okay. So Marco was talking about the ingredients to begin with, and I would argue that maybe the mission is not the first ingredient, but the actual dish. And say, well, actually, are we making fruit salad? And you end up with porridge, and then you realize, well, we put the wrong things in. So we need to be clear on that mission. And then the nature positive by 2030 is we really need to see it as the positive element. And you're absolutely right. Business is still part of the problem, has to become part of the solution in a big way. I think leading companies recognize their responsibility increasingly, and there is a drive to make more commitments, take more action. But if we're honest about it, clearly the voluntary approach is just not cutting it. And that's where the Global Biodiversity Framework, as one of many tools in our toolbox, but an important one, plays that role of giving political certainty to companies to quickly invest, innovate, and shift their business models. And so one of the things that we're calling for also is a really strong target 15. Target 15, some may argue, well, why do we even need target 15 specifically on business? Well, I can tell you that even the fact that it's in the draft, a lot of companies said, oh, right, what do we have to do now to start implementing? It's like, whoa, it's not agreed yet, but they're on the starting blocks to know this is coming and we want to be ready to contribute. So we can learn from the climate discussions with the Paris Agreement and how that's spurred, but we have to have our eyes wide open about the risk of greenwashing. It's a real risk, and that's where the accountability system comes in. That's where one of the machines, it's not just pressing a button, there are multiple machines that we can activate and influence, because guess what? They're man-made. So we collectively have created the systems that we all now are constrained to live within. That means we can change them. And we're seeing that, companies that are starting on their environmental social impact journeys, understanding their deep dependence, not only their impact that can be negative, but by the way, also positive on nature, need to be recognized in the mainstream ways that they make decisions and disclose information to the broader system. And that's why for Target 15, we're pushing for mandatory assessment and disclosure of impacts and dependencies. Because if it remains voluntary, that's more of the same. That's what we're doing now. But if you really want to feed into the investors, the regulators, the lawyers, the grassroots activists, the artists, etc., the consumers, you want to feed into that system in a consistent way to be able to recognize companies beyond their returns from financial capital, as now they're under pressure to do, and recognize also environmental and social impacts and dependencies. But this is a big challenge where actually there is a lot of work that's already going on and making fast progress. And we have elements of those ingredients already cooking up in the saucepans, meaning things like the science-based targets for nature methodologies, that will help companies assess, like the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, to start setting, standards for companies to disclose. And especially with the TNFD, the last one I mentioned, I would encourage all of you to check out the beta version of the methodology that was released last week. These are pieces of really important work that you can all be part of influencing and contributing to. And it goes back to a last point, which really touches me. So no, because of the collective, it's a collective and shared responsibility for our shared planet and people living on it. So I didn't talk really about what I was going to talk about, but there was one one final thought that I think wraps up actually quite well in terms of this transformation that's needed and how we move forward, is on the subsidies. So for those, I'm sure, subsidies is a tricky one. It's like the elephant in the room. We're talking not about all subsidies, we're talking about the environmentally harmful subsidies that unintentionally are sending financing to the wrong places, yet at their essence were developed with socioeconomic reasons in mind that must be kept. So we just have to ask ourselves, if you were going to set up a subsidy now, what would you do? Well, you wouldn't set them up the way they were designed decades ago. So there is an opportunity there. $1.8 trillion a year flow into subsidies that are environmentally harmful. Now, to transition something that's so rooted and embedded, and we don't even have the information of where all of these subsidies go from and where they go to. So the first thing is we need disclosure and transparency, understanding where they are coming from. But in order to operationalize that and actually make the change, is going to happen at a local level. Because you can't just switch off a tap one day to the next and say, oh, sorry, actually, we've decided to change. You're not going to get any support. You can't do that. And it needs to be participatory, and it needs to be in an open and transparent way of saying, right, there are going to be winners and losers, and let's face that. And then how do you bring everyone along to make sure that people's lives and livelihoods remain at the center, that it's a just transition, but that ensure that unintentionally we're not giving a head start to the wrong kind of practice. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I heard you when you said that, this is an open conversation also what business is doing, when they're talking about standards, pathways, approaches to being sustainable, etc. That's an invitation also to join this conversation and bring other elements.
100%. And I'm really sorry, but I just wanted to say on the youth side is that businesses are all ears, because there's in case you hadn't noticed, there's a war on talent, and trying to attract the best people to your company. It's going to be young people. It's going to be the brightest people who have their hearts and minds in the right places. And they're willing to take a 15% or more salary cut to work in a meaningful and impactful role. So HR departments in companies are fully aware of that. And there is a huge strength, even if you feel your voice is not as powerful as it should be, there is a strength in the fact in that piece of human resources. Yeah, thanks.
So Pauline, now to you. You represent a project that has been working very hard in finding pathways for mainstreaming across sectors into governments and into governance. And I would like to ask you, what have been the needs that you have identified to make this a reality, and the approaches that you have identified as helpful for that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to quickly present what BioDev is, because I'm sure that not everyone in the room is aware of what we are doing and who we are. So it's a pilot, it's a project with 16 pilot countries. It's a global project, and there is in the 16 pilot countries, there are some here in the rooms, because I see Benin, I see Uganda, I see Cameroon, I see Gabon, and we've got 13 of our countries in Africa, but we've got also Vietnam and Fiji and Guyana. And we are working in different eco-region. We are working in different socio-cultural contexts. We are working with various level of economies. We are working with various people. And I think that, as it has been said, we need unity in the vision, but maybe we also need diversity in this vision, in how you interpret this vision. And so BioDev is this multi-country project, and it is implemented with Expertise France and IUCN and WWF. And what is at stake here is bringing all the people around the table. It's bringing, okay, the state, the private sector, the civil society, the researchers around the table. And when I say the state, it's not only the Minister of Environment, it's also the Minister of Agriculture, of Mining, of Planning, of Financial and Finance, and all the sectoral ministries. Talking one to each other is the starting point. Where do we start? We start at the national level. That's how BioDev works, because we need a global mission, we need a global vision. We need to know that we are not alone. We are not doing, we are not trying to improve ourselves on our own, and because we fear to be disadvantaged when improving our practices. So we need this global vision, but where do we start concretely in the ground? It's at the level, at the national level, and then at the local level. So that's where BioDev is starting. It's at the national level, and it starts with convincing businesses, convincing ministries that their interest is in conserving biodiversity. We need science, we need data, because this is what all the people acknowledge. They are willing to change if they can be sure, or pretty sure, that they will get an advantage. So we have to collect data, we have to bring data understandable, we have to bring data to the people who don't look at biodiversity. So the first step of BioDev is scientific data gathered and bring to this platform, multi-stakeholder platform. And then this is the base of a discussion, and then seeing which sector is the most impactful to our biodiversity, which sector is key for our economy, and how can we reconcile nature and development? How can we see that protecting nature is not against development, but it's, at the end of the day, it's the way through development? Because we need goals, we need targets, we need something to push ourselves, or to pull ourselves. But what is important is the journey, because we need to think of, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? Because we don't need to think of, what am I going to do in 2030? What am I going to do in the next decades? We are human. We wake up every morning and we say, I need to have a job. I need to feed my family. I need to have shelter. I need to be warm or to be cool. And we have to focus on that. Where conservation works, it's with people. Where restoration works is with businesses who get income from restoration. And that's the second point. It's, we are human, we are diversity of human. And when in BioDev, when there is this platform, and they selected some sectors, they selected, of course, agriculture, but they selected also mining industries, quarries, and also, of course, forestry, fishing, the main economy we know, which are impacting biodiversity. But they are not only impactors, they are job providers. They are food providers. So we have to acknowledge that, okay, they are part of the problem, but they are who we are. We are what we eat. We are what we wear. We are where we live, and how we go from one place to another. We are everything of that. And then we have also to acknowledge all the component of the world we live in, but do not forget that we live in a financial world. We need to have the means to do what we want to do. Of course, we have to change. We have to show that we are not doing greenwashing. But if we don't want to do greenwashing, it's because we understand that we have much more interest in changing our way of doing business. So companies won't be keen on doing greenwashing if they do see their own interest in changing their way of doing business. And that's the third point of what I wanted to say, that of course there will be winners and losers, but there are already winners and losers, and biodiversity is a loser. And because biodiversity is a loser, the humanity is a loser. But it's so delay on time. It's so long-term perspective that we do not take the measure of that. And so now let's recognize that we need to have the measure and the report of what we do on a long time frame. And if we do recognize this time frame, we see who are losers, who are winners, and maybe there won't be so many differences in the next losers and winners. And at the end of the day, there will be much more winners than losers when we'll protect biodiversity, when we live in harmony with nature. And then people are already doing some good things, but we have to help them change, because for now they are encouraged to do business as usual. So that's where finance goes. Finance needs to be on board. Finance needs to help people change, because I think people are willing to change. And that's where we have to acknowledge all the components of the society, the human, the business, of course, the youth, the cultural implication of all that, and the financial implication of our society. And I can just invite the countries here to give their feedbacks, where the companies in Benin, in Uganda, in Gabon, and in Cameroon are really implicated in planning and putting into the ground some really transformative changes, and they already are doing it.
Thank you, and I think that's a very good bridge to Ingrid. So Pauline was mentioning, the need to translate whatever we do at the global level to the national level, but of course there is also the need to translate that to the subnational and local level, where actual implementation of biodiversity is mostly happening. So what is your thoughts on the needs from methodologies and approaches to make that a reality, Ingrid?
Hi, that's better. Okay, so let me just quickly repeat. So one of the things that struck me was that there was so much resonation with everybody, the points that have been made, because cities are at the front line. They where people connect, whether it's a big city or a small city, even at the state level, if we look at the sort of landscape approach. And cities and subnational governments have realized that this is where decisions are made on a daily basis. This is where actions are taken and implementation happens on a daily basis that may relate to infrastructure. Maybe it's a wastewater treatment plant. Maybe it's, a huge big development for business purposes or for residential purposes. But it's also policies that happen at the local level. And this is where there's the most direct impact, and where there's a connection between whether it's the business sector or the youth or the IPLCs, even the NGOs, where we have concerned groups and organizations that are pushing an agenda around nature positive or around invasive species or whatever the case may be. So what we need, and this is something that we have already identified over the past decade, cities have organized themselves and have come up with a plan of how cities and subnational governments can respond to the biodiversity framework. And there's about 7 or 8 things, and I'm going to just run through them very quickly because I'm mindful of time. But from the basic level of, for example, contributing to local biodiversity strategies and action plans, whatever you call them, and these need to feed into and align with the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Obviously, something like communication and education and awareness raising, that's an important thing. Many times you get the types of programs at the local level. That's also something that cities can do. Information, having the right information. Somebody talked about science-based indicators and science, and the fact that you can make a good or bad decision for nature depending on the access, the information that you have. And it can include information about, for example, indigenous peoples' rights. You talked about human rights. Those are all important things. Resource mobilization. Eva, you mentioned something like subsidies, but there's a lot that cities can do. For example, they can incentivize good practices, good business practices, whether these are through tax rebates or through public-private partnerships, whatever the case may be. Blended finance is something that one should be also looking at more, including the insurance industry. There's a lot of investment that happens in the insurance industry. Let us direct it in a nature positive way. But cities have budgets, provinces have budgets, and it's about rethinking how we allocate the funds to a more nature positive way, so that we look at green infrastructure or ecological infrastructure, nature-based solutions, whatever you want to call it. I think something that's really important is the issue of capacity building. There is capacity at the local level. Sometimes in some of the cities, it's even better maybe than at a provincial level or in some small countries. But there is a need for raising awareness and the capacity and skills development and skills transfer and knowledge transfer between the national, between science, between communities and cities. So that is an important thing as well. And finally, I think that, somebody was talking about the recipe. I always say that if we were a recipe and we were baking a bread, for example, let's not go the fruit salad way, but baking the bread, cities and subnationals are, in a sense, the yeast or the raising agent. If you don't put that in, the bread is going to fall flat. So what cities can do, and they have already done this in the past, as well as provinces and states, is they take action. And we've come up with a way in which we can mobilize cities to better make commitments. These commitments should align to the 2030 targets. Yes, there's one target that speaks specifically to cities. But if you look at all of those targets, for example, target 14, the targets that deal with pollution, just about every one of them, cities and states can have an impact, either negative or positive. So what we think is very important, and we have what we call our Cities with Nature Action Plan that we're going to, action platform that we're launching later this week, is to show what cities are really doing, gathering those commitments, and then include a way in which you can track progress against the commitments and report on that progress. And that information should feed into the national reporting. It should align with an NBSAPs. And I think that if we can get really mobilize a lot more concerted action at the local level, we can start having the transformative action that we're looking for.
Thank you, Ingrid. And Elizabeth, dear Elizabeth, thank you again for honoring us with your presence today. And you've heard that we are trying to make bread, the best bread available. And we've heard today different views. We see that there's lots of synergies here. So I would be curious on your reflection on how your experiences how can we, and perhaps also the Secretariat of the CBD, foster this process of bringing this common vision and all the ingredients we need beyond this common vision and this diversity of elements that we need to build this vision to life.
Thank you very much. My apologies that I joined in late. First, I got lost, but also the plenary too delayed. I went first floor, but anyway, I'm here. Indeed, I've heard of recipe for the bread. It seems the bread is ready to get into the oven, but if that oven will not have appropriate temperature, then that bread will flop. And what I've heard is, and I think is a major lesson we learned from the previous decade and what is happening now. And this is what I've heard so far. Apologies, I missed some. The fact that we are seeing all stakeholders now on board, engaged with the development of the framework. If I may begin with the youth, if we are talking, and I was talking to them this morning, if 7.9 billion people in the world population, 1.2 billion are youth, and if we add the children, they make 40% of the population. Clearly, their role and influence is major. And of course, all the losses or the defects which we have happened so far in the world of biodiversity loss or pollution or environmental degradation, land degradation, I think all of us here are responsible. And the youth are reminding us that we have spoiled the world, and it is their turn with their energy, technology savvy, being courageous. They are reminding us to give them space. Delighted these processes have given them space. I see representatives of indigenous peoples, local communities here, 80% of biodiversity, they are the custodians. And yet we know history tells us how much of these custodians have also suffered as a result of our own development actions. And now they're on board to remind us as population, us as different stakeholders, us also as governments, that they need their land to be protected. They need their rights to resources. And for some of you probably not being aware here, I receive emails daily. The moment I go into my machine, I have to begin deleting. Basically the pushback, rightly so, campaign going on 30 by 30. Probably, I'm sure it will go through, but yes, are their rights being safeguarded? Are we going to really follow the right-based approach in the implementation of the framework? Delighted Eva has mentioned of the role of the business, the financial sector. And true, the financial sector are taking action. I have the privilege to work with the task force on nature-related financial disclosure. The disclosure being developed by the market for the market. So, and they know that as she was talking of profits, that those profits will not be accrued if they also do not take action. If, 40% or half of the global GDP is dependent on nature. And yet we know 1.8 billion goes into harmful subsidies. So yes, there are risks. Yes, there are impacts, there are dependence, but there's also opportunities. And those opportunities are what then enables them to take action. And we welcome that move. And we see this is literally a recent development, which we hope that the framework will further take that into account. But the business will not operate effectively if the policies and regulations by the governments are not in place to enable them to operate. And that's why Eva was talking of mandatory disclosure. Are the governments ready to really move from voluntary disclosures, which are already happening at their own initiatives, but really to push that into mandatory disclosure. But that can only be mandatory if also the regulations are in place and policies are in place, because that then becomes an incentive and not disincentive in this respect. So what we are seeing here, and we are also saying the framework itself, just like the Global Biodiversity Framework, just like the nature-related financial disclosure framework, which is built upon from the Climate Financial Disclosure Framework, they are all science-based. The framework is science-based. So we need the researchers, we need the academician. And this is what most of the recent reports are giving us, these threatening messages that Marco will tell us 68% of species are still falling between 1970 to 2016. The IPBES is telling us over 1 million species are going to extinction. WWF is telling us global GDP is dependent on nature. So yes, there are opportunities there. We have spoiled the world, and that's why I'm saying all of us in this room are responsible, but we hope our children and the youth and our grandchildren continue to keep us reminding of what we've done. And the reminder clearly comes from what you have underlined, awareness raising, because the framework will not be implemented just by government, business, finance, everybody. And that's why you're saying the Global Biodiversity Framework is not just universal, it's a framework for all including our children, because we begin at family level before we come into big things. So if our children grow at that level with such an awareness, knowing the importance of the parks in the cities, the importance of our own waste management in the cities, then the future will have a better place to live than where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to open the floor for questions if someone in the audience perhaps wish to comment. Let me give you the mic.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask a question which relates to a conversation I was having today and heard yesterday. Local communities are currently suffering enormously from invitations to sell out, basically. I mean, this has happened in Borneo and it's happening in Colombia. And what I want to ask is really awareness. And you've talked a lot about awareness and raising and people being more conscious of things. But how will that change anything without real system change? Companies are based on profit. That is the primary consideration. Many companies are now looking at ecosystem services as a potential product for the market. And of course, as they grow more scarce, the price will go up. So how are we going to deal with that particular dynamic? Because unless we deal with those kind of things, we're not going to change anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone perhaps wants to react to that question?
Thank you so much. Excellent question, and thank you for raising it. In terms of the last one on ecosystem services, that can be a way to value, not necessarily put a price, but understand what the actual value of the services nature provides is to inform better decision-making. Without knowing it, what we're doing now is nature does not have a value in those decision-making, and you could say the value is therefore zero in some of those decision-making processes. So I would be cautious to bundle everything into one bucket of, being able to understand how a company impacts and depends on ecosystem services is necessarily going to lead to the mismanagement or the over abuse of using those services. Rather, I would argue there are different methodologies available to help understand the impact and dependencies companies have, the value of those ecosystem services so that they are better managed because they're included in decision-making and taken into account.
Thank you. I have a, yes. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Eva said, because I think that there's another aspect to this. It's also around awareness raising and shifting us as consumers to not buy things that are bad and perpetuate. I mean, the markets respond to consumers. So I think, and I like what Elizabeth said, we are all responsible here.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'm going. Okay, Melina, please.
I just have a quick comment. I know that it's all depend on everybody's responsibilities and so on. And that, yes, we as consumers have responsibilities, but like, this has been kind of like thrown upon the young generation a lot. And like our message nowadays is like, we can't blame the individual for this kind of responsibility really, because where does the impacts come from and what kind of power do we really have to make those choices? Like a lot of our community, they have issues because they cannot choose to eat what is most sustainable, most local, most everything nice, because those are not available in our countries. Like it's easy here in Europe to find those. Like go to like El Salvador or like Benin or like other countries to try to find those. It's not available. So I don't think it's only about consumer. I think like Eva mentioned something really important at the beginning. If there's no regulation, we are seeing like a market-based economy only based on market is not solving anything. And I think we need to start acknowledging that and changing from there. I also think that regulation doesn't only depend on governments and on the negotiators here, because I know that many countries in the South, their governments, their interests have been captured by lobbyists. We know how it is, right? So like, how come the governments decide on make regulations if their mandates from higher ups are not to make regulations? So if there is not an effort from the peers of the business sector, right, to really try to make the case the same way our peers, like young people, yes, like let's get active, let's do something. Like I think there needs to be this kind of sorority, between the communities to really strive for something that is based on values that are collective, because it's the same. I don't think all of us here don't know what needs to be done. The problem is that the how, it doesn't depend only on me or you or the government or the business. It depends on everybody's interests coming together. So if we don't agree on common level playing field, guidelines, regulations, principles that are good for everybody. I mean, and we have those resolutions. We have Human Rights Council resolutions. We have like principles of the environment. We have those. We need to use them. We need to remind ourselves of them. And we need to start building up the regulations, the level playing field necessary for business to do the right thing, for governments to be able to take the right decisions, for then consumers to be able to choose better. And then we have a virtuous circle and not a vicious one.
Thank you, Melina. So if there are no more comments, I would, give you the floor.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Alfredo Nyai. First of all, I would like to, I'll give my comment based on what Eva, Ingrid, and Pauline said. And I'll say by one is that we are talking about a recipe that is all inclusive, where everybody enjoys the meal. But I believe that we are forgetting that there's a chief cook in the kitchen when it comes to issue with the conservation for all, and that's the government. And we're also aware that here, this is a party-led negotiations, a party-led framework. So there's no way we are going to talk and forget the chief cook, or we shall have no food. And for this matter, I appreciate what Eva says, that I think we need to move away from nature for business is now business for nature. Because this is what Biodev is saying. This is what Paul said, that the business community needs nature in order to have their profit sustainable. And therefore, the mainstreaming aspect must include all parties. It must be inclusive. And here, the major player is the government. The government is the regulator, but the business community is the consumer of the regulations. And they must work in partnership. They must agree on their responsibilities. When it comes to the issue of spatial planning, the city development must be sustainable and inclusive. How? Physical planning, spatial planning must be nature-based, but nature positive. We need to identify the key ecosystem services and plan against that for both humanity and nature. At the same time, it must be inclusive, where all parties should play a role. Finally, let's avoid quick fix for quick gains. Let's have quick fix for sustainable gains. Thank you.
Perhaps any comments by the panel? Does someone wishes to comment? Okay. So I'm going to post question by our Zoom audience. So Mason, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, from Canada, asks, please address the 30 by 30 as a pathway for transformative change. So that's the question and the reflections on the potential of that for transformative change. Yeah, that's for Marco, actually. But Melina, you can give it a go, and then we'll go for Marco.
I'm sorry, Marco, for taking the floor before you and again, but we just organized like our group organized a workshop together with different sectors to exactly discuss reimagine conservation and try to sort of like, I mean, we all know that most likely even Elizabeth said that 30 by 30 might come, like it might be passed and everything. So we are reflecting what does that means, because I think everything that Ameyali said about the reality of the conservation on the ground, and then like in understanding that this all comes into a historical like context of oppression and exploitation and human rights violation, and that we are still having those systems in place, right? Because it's so difficult to change that. What would that look? And this has been a huge concern from our communities in the South and young people, because they have been living in parks that have been like created based on evictions, right? So like the outcomes of the discussion, this is the interesting thing. It's all about, again, the same. It's about regulations, it's about safeguards, it's about principles, right? So it doesn't matter which issue we are talking about here when it comes to the post-2020, or like if you're addressing pollution or also conservation in this case, like what was the outcomes is like equitable governance, diversification of like different but like ways of doing the OECMs, right? Or the protected areas, different ways of recognizing different types of governance, and like a very strong human rights-based approaches. So this is what came from our community.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. So look, the 30 by 30 is one of the many approaches that we need to take. First of all, it's about the principle of securing as much as possible natural spaces and ecosystems left on the planet. We are losing at an accelerated rate, and 30 by 30 is an ambitious target that the world hopefully will agree to, in order to make sure that at least 30% of the planet is maintained in a very productive ecological state. Of course, the how is super important as well. It's not just about the what, and also the where is very important as well. So 30 by 30 is actually much more complex target than the one that looks just looking at a percentage element. And so it is about the how, it is about how it's governed, how it is implemented, it is about what benefits the 30% produces to whom, it's about rights, it's about inclusion, it's about all that. And it's about uniting also society. Government have a role in the 30 by 30, communities have a role, indigenous people have a role. private business at a role. So there is a role for everybody to deliver this very ambitious target. But let me also say 30% is not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to reverse the curve of biodiversity loss. We need to protect 30% of the planet minimum in a natural state. It doesn't mean embalmment, means maintaining ecological productivity, but we need to also concentrate on the other 70%, because that's where actually the biggest challenge perhaps is gonna be. And so focusing on 30 by 30, it's an important element of the bigger picture, but let's not forget the 70%. This is where the subsidies discussion comes in. This is where the production and consumption comes in. This is where the footprint reduction targets come in. This is part of the same challenge. Focusing only and thinking that protecting 1/3 of the planet is going to solve the problems of biodiversity, it's not right. And so it is a super important element of the GBF. We support it very strongly and needs to be implemented in the right way. But the rest of the planet has to be tackled and supported by GBF as well, because biodiversity is widespread everywhere and is needed everywhere, even in productive landscapes.
Mayali, do you wish to react?
Yes, thank you. I think, hello, does it work? Yeah. I think Melina and Marco both raised some of the points, and I think the how is critical, Marco. I think though right now in the current context of the GBF, the current language does not have any proactive recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And the only avenue to be part of this 30% recognition right now is protected areas and OECMs. And there is a huge opportunity to recognize beyond those two categories. If we really think about it, 34% or more is already being protected or managed or governed by Indigenous peoples and local communities. And if you look at it that way, then 30% is unambitious, were we to include Indigenous territories within that. But if we are to include Indigenous territories within the 30% target or to support their participation in it, we must do so with their free prior informed consent and their self-determination, and only include those who want to be included and not those who aren't. So I think it is about the how. I think that's a major issue. I think we are sitting at a point right now where we can send a strong political message saying that the historical legacy of abuses will not continue, and they're not historical, they're current, they're happening now. And so how we're going to implement the 30% target is essential. And we can take some action here in the negotiations to make sure that there is that very clear proactive recognition of rights within target 3, and that there are very clear headline indicators that will help us monitor the implementation of the framework in a way that does actually produce biodiversity outcomes and not paper parks or anything like that.
Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes. I think that there was another question in the audience, so let's.
Thank you very much. I'm Sylvia Carlson-Finkhausen from the International Environment Forum and Wageningen University. I just have, comment reflections on the introductory statements by Marco there. On the one hand, the need for a one quantitative target. If you look at other international processes beyond the climate regime, that doesn't mean that there's a guarantee for success or for a galvanizing campaign. There can also be risks with it if it reduces the realization of complexity. So I think what we need to be aware of that isn't a magical solution necessarily. And the other aspect of it is you said that there's been a move now from being driven by moral responsibility to more like survival, because now we can see that we need this to even survive. And obviously, we have created that situation, but to kind of look at it in that way and say, well, the moral responsibility was a bad path is also not.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
No. But
please don't put on my words things I didn't say.
No, but that it's insufficient, or that we are now kind of have a stronger narrative, perhaps. But they are complementary. They're very much complementary, but there's the third value perspective. I mean, there are multiple value perspectives, but IPBES has been raising this, and thanks to Indigenous peoples who are raising this, and that's the relational value perspective, which is not about either or of those endpoints, but more that we are doing this because we are part of our environment, and we are looking at humanity and its other species as a community. And actually the CBD long-term vision of living in harmony with nature captures that. in a sense. So we can also see what we have and not only regret that we don't have, a number. So that was my reflection. Thank you.
Maybe just a quick response to that. First of all, probably in me, you have some of the people that have the strongest moral and relationship based value in terms of in supporting the conservation of nature. They are complementary, and I didn't say at all, and just for the records, I didn't say at all that the moral duty is something not important, or indeed the way we relate to nature is all part of the same dimension. What I'm saying, however, is that agenda until now has not been able to shift the interest, financial, economic, and political that has driven in the last 50 years. WWF was born 60 years ago. Our mission is about a world where people live in harmony with nature, believe it or not. Is our mission written on our statement, on our statute, but it's not enough. This is an aspirational goal, which is fantastic and is driving a lot of our personal behaviors. But in order to actually drive shift in the system and in the economic system in particular, we need something more measurable. Business and economy need measurements, and measurements drive accountability. Until now, we don't have that. We didn't have that in the nature framework, and I think this has been a major problem. So completely agree on all what you said, but don't discount the importance of having a very clearly measurable and accountable global goal, as we have in climate. Because without net zero, without carbon neutrality, we wouldn't be even where we are today. We know we are already late, but I strongly believe in that, and it's not either or. I agree with you on that.
Okay, thank you. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I wanted to raise 2 points. One would be that this conversation, that our project is all about this kind of dialogues and about supporting as much as possible this conversation, also to create this common mission and these common elements that we all can agree on and that can move forward this process. I also wanted to say that none of the questions that were posted on Zoom will be lost, and that if you have other points that you wish to raise, this would also inform our future activities, workshops, dialogues, and everything that we want to organize. So please feel free to deliver as much questions and topics as you want. And you can find our contact here at this table, and then we'll be happy to hear from you. And I would like to give the floor to Elizabeth again, and to have the final word.
My final word or message, thanks for the opportunity. One is the acknowledgement that we are all here as different stakeholders. And it is our duty and obligation to really make sure that we are heard, and hopefully then the party-driven process will take those recommendations on board to make the framework even as stronger as we wish to see it incoming. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we close the formal part of the event, but of course you're free to to stay here and converse with us. We will be here. Thank you.